Let's start from the Mishnah Yidam Abayz. We have a Mishnah here. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda said, Bodkin or Yudalad, that you should be searching for chametz, as you know, from the beginning of the Masechta, or means the beginning of the evening. So the evening of the 14th of Nisan, also known as Erev Pesach, that's what we do. Uvi Yudalad Shachris. But Rabbi Yehuda also seems to be saying that you also have to check on the 14th in the morning as well. Uvishas Habior, and also at the time of burning chametz, that is, as we'll see in the next Mishnah, the 6th hour of the day, the hour before Chatzos Hayom. So it sounds like, at least at first, Rabbi Yehuda is requiring us to check at 3 different points in time. The Chachamim say, what we're more familiar with is Lo Badak or Yadalad. If you didn't check on the evening of the 14th, which is when you should, so then Yivdok B'Yadalad, so check in the morning of the 14th. Lo Badak B'Yadalad, if you didn't check in the morning, Yivdok B'Soch HaMoed. Check during the Moed. Moed here doesn't mean the holiday of Pesach. Moed means the time, again, of Bior, of burning. So before Chatzos, then you should check. Lo Badak B'Soch HaMoed, if you don't check during that time, the time of burning chametz, yivdok la'achar hamoed. So then check after that time, after Chatzos Hayom. Rashi tells you up until Pesach formally begins. At the time that Pesach begins, we will not tell you to do a search. That'll become clear shortly. Umasher Mashayer, and that which is left over. You do your search for you're searching your house for Pesach. You left a few things for breakfast, let's say. So with that which is left over, yanichenu b'tzina, leave it in a private, guarded place, so that things shouldn't get mixed up, and then you don't have to do a whole nother bedika of your house again when you find out that you don't know where that chametz is. Keep it in a secure area. Okay. So the Gemara says, "My time in the Rabbi Yehuda." What is Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning that it sounds like you need 3 different bedikos? You need 3 different checks of your house. Rav Chizda and Rabbi Bar Rav Huna, Adamrei Tarvayo, both Rav Chizda and Rabbi Bar Rav Huna say, "Keneged shlosha hashbasos shebatorah," to correspond to 3 different mentionings of cessation of having chametz in your house that is in the Torah. You have 3 psukim. Lo yireh lecha chametz, lo yireh lecha saor. One pasuk says you should not see any chametz or leavening agents in your home. Shivas yamim saor lo yimatzi b'vateichem. Another pasuk says for 7 days you shouldn't find any leavening agents in your house. Ach bayom harishon tashbishus or mibateichem. Third pasuk, on the first day of Pesach, make sure that all of the leavening agents are gone from your house as well. So 3 different psukim lead to 3 different searches. Masiv Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef asks a question on this though from a brayso. You have Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Kol shelo badak b'shlosha prakim alalu." If you don't check seemingly during one of these 3 times, meaning he's not requiring all 3, requiring during one of them. So shuv eino bodek. At that point, you no longer check. End quote of the brayso. Alma mikan ve'elach hu depligi. You see that the only machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim is not how many times I check, but only about what do I do if I reach the point of Chatzos Hayom, whether I should continue checking or not. Rabbi Yehuda says stop there at Chatzos, and the Chachamim say don't stop there. Okay, Mar Zutra Masni Hachi. Mar Zutra taught it the following way, this question, where it's more glaring. That Masiv Rav Yosef question from a brayso, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, Kol shelo badak be'echad mishlosha prakim halalu. Anybody that doesn't check during one of these 3 times, there is very clear. He's only requiring a check of 1 among these three periods of time. So if you don't do it during one of those 3, halalu shuv eino bodek. At that point, don't check. Amma b'shuv eino bodek hu depligi. You see that the machlokas is purely based on whether what I should do at the point of Chatzos and onward, whether I should bother checking or not. Rabbi Yehuda says don't bother at that point. The Chachamim say no, that you should. Again, as Rashi says, until Pesach proper begins. Okay. So now we answer. So which way is it? Does Rabbi Yehuda require checking during all 3 times, or just one of the 3? So we say, Ela Rabbi Yehuda nami im lo badak amar. Right? Rabbi Yehuda is in the Mishnah saying, as we showed from these braysos, he's talking about if you didn't check during this period, check during the next. He's only talking about checking during one of these 3. B'hacha b'hacha miflagi. And the machlokas about what to do at a certain point if you didn't check, it's purely about the following. Mar savar mekame isura in, basar isura lo. One opinion, Rabbi Yehuda would say that before the Isser of Chametz kicks in, you should still be looking. But after the Isser kicks in, you should not. After Chatzos Hayom on Erev Pesach, Chametz is forbidden to eat mida oraisa. It doesn't carry the same strict punishment of kares, as if I was to eat it on Pesach proper, but it is Asr min HaTorah to eat Chametz past Chatzos. So at that point in time, Rabbi Yehuda says, don't bother looking. What will come out of this is because what we're worried about is you find Chametz, you may instinctually eat it. So checking right now at this point in time, Rabbi Yehuda says is counterproductive. Because it's a gzera, it's a decree that maybe you may come to eat from it if you were to look for it. For Rabbanan Savri, lo gazrin. And the Rabbanan, however, who said that you should check even after Chatzos, they say there's no such gzera. We're not worried about you instinctually eating it. Rashi again would point out that is only up to a certain point in time. Once Pesach proper begins, even the Rabbanan would say, don't bother checking. We have rules and procedures for what happens if you find chametz in your house on Pesach, but we don't encourage an active search at that point in time. Okay. Umi Gazer Rabbi Yehuda Doma Asi L'Mechamine. Actually, before we do this, the rest of the DAF is going to it's going to be focused on figuring out the rationales between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanon. So that we're going to question the principles behind each person's ruling with regards to what we just said, whether I stop checking at Chatzos or I don't. So, Umigas Rabbi Yehuda Dilma Asi L'Mechamine. Does Rabbi Yehuda really have a decree lest a person come to eat chametz that he finds if he was to search for it? But I have a Mishnah that seems like Rabbi Yehuda is not worried about such possibilities occurring of people instinctually eating things that are forbidden to them, because we say Mishakare va'omer. When the korban omer was brought, what that does is that makes grain which is chadash, which is forbidden for us to eat, at least in Eretz Yisrael, quite possibly in Chutz Aretz also. But let's say, at least in Israel, chadash is forbidden until the korban omer is brought. The new grain that had taken root up until that point in time. But once the omer is brought, it's all fine. It all has the status of yashan. But once the korban omer is brought, yotzinu motzian shuka Yerushalayim shem maleim kemach vekali. You would see coming out of the shuk, the shuk of Yerushalayim would be bursting at the seams. It would be filled with flour and roasted flour from the new crop, which is now yashan.
So today that we don't have a korban omer, how does it become yashan?
So at the Midoraisa, at the very beginning of the second day of Pesach, it becomes Yashan. Midorabanan, we wait until the end of that day. That's how we operate. Okay, so when the korban omer was brought, all the Shuk of Yerushalayim was bursting at the seams with all of this now permitted grain, all these grain products, this flour and this roasted flour. But Shalo b'ratzon chachamim. That was not in accordance with the will of the sages. They did not want that to take place, because what's going on? In order to make flour, in order to make roasted flour, that means you were doing a lot of processing up until that point. People were dealing with chadash. They were working with chadash while it was still forbidden. The chachamim supposedly did not like that, because people could instinctually eat such grain, and that would be aser. Different Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion of the incident, that it was something that should not have happened, but was happening. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, B'rtzon Chachamim hayu osin. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He said, no, the Chachamim were totally fine with that. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda is not concerned here about people dealing with things which are forbidden and instinctually eating it. That seems to contradict what he said earlier about chametz. I don't want you searching for chametz because I'm worried you'll come to eat it. So which way is it? Is Rabbi Yehuda concerned about habitual eating or not? So you say, "V'lo kagaz Rabbi Yehuda dil me'asi lemechamine." Sorry, just finishing off the question in the Gemara itself. We see here Rabbi Yehuda is not making a gezerah that you may come to eat from it. So Amar Rava answers, Shane Chadash mitok shelo hitarta lo ela al yedei kituf hu zachar. Rava says, and that's going to be the unifying theme of the entire back and forth of this Gemara, every case that you're going to use as a challenge to these principles is an exception for one reason or another. So Rava says Chadash is an exception because there's a rule that when you want to harvest Chadash, if it's before the korban omer is brought, so you have to do it through kituf, through plucking it out of the ground, as opposed to doing regular katsira, reaping it with a scythe. So since you're going to do that, since you're going to do kituf, you're going to remember the isser in question, and you won't instinctually eat it. Since you have a hecker, you have a shinui that you're employing in the way you take it out, we're not worried about you instinctually eating it. Not so by chametz. There's no such concept. So that's the difference. That's why Rabbi Yehuda was goes there by chametz. Don't bother checking. Whereas by chadash, he's allowing you to deal with things, even though, and he's not worried about a person instinctually eating it because you have a hacker. Amar le Abai, but Abai asks on this. Tenach b'shas katifa. Fine, that works very nicely during the time in which you're harvesting it and you're plucking it. Techina v'harakada ma'ikal meimar. But what do you say about the processes of grinding that grain into flour or sifting it? The people that are involved at that stage in the process, they don't seem to have any hecker, so why are you allowing them to do it? They might eat it. So halokasha, that's not a problem. Techina berachaya diyad. We said, no, there are in fact shinuyim here also. Grinding is going to be done with a hand grinder. That's the only thing you're allowed to do for chadash grain. That's apparently a shinui from what they usually use. Harkada al gabe napa. And sifting was done on top of the sifter as opposed to within, meaning you used the other side of it. So you did a shinui there also, and that was a reminder for everybody that dealt with these things not to partake of this stuff because it's aser. Okay, now we say Ela haditnan, but what about the following Mishnah? We say that kotzin beis hashlachim vishe ba'amakim. A person is allowed to harvest in the normal way, with a scythe, etc., in areas, beis hashlachim are irrigated fields that are watered through passageways, and also fields that are in the valley. Avalo gochin, as long as you don't actually stack that grain. The rationale is, the reason why we demand the shinui in the harvesting is because the Torah tells us that the korban omer should be reishis ketzirachem. It should be the beginnings of your reaping. Nothing else should be reaped in the normal way until that point. if I'm dealing with crops in these areas, these are subpar areas to grow grain in. They're not fit for a korban omer in the first place, so we don't require that shinoi of how you harvest these grains, because they're not fit for the omer to begin with. But in any event, so you have grain which the prohibition of chadash applies to, and we don't have any shinoi in the way it's taken. So what do you say about those? There's no hecker there. But Kimnik Rabbi Yehuda, in the Gemara where that Mishnah is discussed, we established that Mishnah to be in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda. So Ma'ikal Meimar, what are you going to say? Where is the hecker? There is none. So why isn't Rabbi Yehuda making a gezerah that you shouldn't be able to harvest this stuff because you may come to eat it? So Ela Amar Abaye, Abaye says in response, Chadash Badil Minei, Chametz Lo Badil Minei. The difference is that Chadash is something which people are separated from. All year long, people have this mindset of Chadash being aser. Whereas by chametz is something which is mutter all year round, so we're much more worried about a person instinctively coming to eat from it. That deserves a gezerah, whereas chadash does not. So that's going to be the distinction. Amar Rava.
Is that saying that there wasn't a shinui?
Sorry?
That they didn't require shinui?
So there you go, right. In these this grain did not require shinui, there's no hecker, and Abaye ultimately says, no hecker required. Since it's an item which you're normally used to viewing as prohibited, we're not as worried about a person eating it accidentally.
Like broadly, he's just saying in these kind of fields.
In the other kinds of fields, the same rationale would apply. It happens to be you also have a hecker, but you don't even need it, Abaye says. The main principle behind all of this is that chadash is something which people know to back off from, and we're not worried about accidental eating. Chametz, you need gezeros, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, Amar Rava. So Rava says, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda kasha, the Rabbanan lo kasha. Lo kasha? That's how I should read it. The Rabbanan lo kasha? What? Rabbi Yehuda, you have this contradiction that you've resolved. Fine. But for the rabbis, you don't have a question? I'll explain. Rabbi Meir is a member of the Rabbanan, so keep that in mind. In our Mishnah, the Rabbanan said, even after Chatzos, continue searching for chametz. Okay, Rabbi Meir, who is a member of the Rabbanan, with regards to Chadash, what did he say? You shouldn't be dealing with Chadash grain at all until after the Korban Omer is brought. So now that from that perspective, we also have a stira. How come in our Mishnah, the Rabbanan are not worried that you may come to eat it? There's no gezerah that says no more searching after Chatzos. Whereas by Chadash, Rabbi Meir felt that merchants should not be dealing with Chadash grain until after the Omer is brought. So which way is it? So now we say the Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha kiddeshaninan. So the stira, the contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda's opinions is as we've resolved it earlier, right? That a chametz is something which people are not necessarily, or they're not always all year round separated from. So you need a gezerah there. Whereas by Chadash, people always know it's forbidden. There you don't need a gezerah. Fine. That's the resolution for Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanan nami lo kasha. And the rabbi's contradiction also, there's no problem. Why? Hu atzma mechazer alav lesorfo. The Rabbanan say the reason why you can keep looking for chametz after chatzos, and I'm not worried about you eating it, is because why are you searching for chametz? To burn it, to kill it, to get rid of it. So if that's the mindset in which a person is, the Rabbanan say there's no need to make a gezerah there. Nobody's going to come to eat it when they are specifically on a mission to find chametz to search and destroy. And the meikal kalchamine, is he going to eat it at that point? The Rabbanan don't think so. In other words, everybody has a reason as to why they think their case, why their application of the rules makes sense. Rav Ashi says, Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha. Rav Ashi is going to give an alternative answer. The contradiction between Rabbi Yehuda's dinim are also not a contradiction. Again, Rabbi Yehuda's contradiction is by chametz, he says you should not be searching past chatzos. He's worried you may come to eat it. Whereas by chadash, he has no such concerns. So Rav Ashi says the reason, the way I can resolve it is as follows: Kemach v'kali tanan. What did the Mishnah say? What were they doing in the markets of Yerushalayim when the Korban Omer was brought? They were selling flour and roasted flour. Those are not products which people eat. So nobody's going to instinctually eat flour. Even if it even if it's something which generally is a food product. In this form, it's not. So you're not worried about people eating it. The Gemara responds, though, Hadir Ravashi Badusahi. That which Ravashi said, Badusa literally means a lie. It sounds very strong language. Ravashi said a lie. Hatenach mikale ve'elach. Because what does that answer do for you? It explains from the point at which I roast the flour and onward. It's not an edible product yet. Meikara ad kali ma'ikila meimar. But what are you going to say about that grain from the harvesting point until you've brought it to the point in which it's roasted flour? It is a food product. People do eat raw grains sometimes. So it's not going to work. If you're going to answer, from that At that stage, you're fine because you have that hecker, you have the plucking method, like Rava said earlier. But what about the crops that we mentioned earlier from these irrigated fields, from the valleys, that you don't need to do this plucking, you don't have any hecker, so then what is there to say? Those have no hecker, and those are an edible product, so why is there no gezerah there? Rather, it's like we said, Rav Ashi's answer, that these products are not edible, it's a lie, it's not a valid answer. Okay. Now we're going to question more of the, underlying principles behind things. So we say, anytime I'm dealing with a product in which people are generally away from all year round, is it true that Rabbi Yehuda makes no gezeros? Batanan, I have a Mishnah that tells us, we recognize this from Kabbalah Shabbos, this is in Perek B'Mem Adlikin. It says, Lo yikov adam shefo feres shal beitz avim ala ena shemen v'yitanena b'tzad haner v'shvil shetem ratefes. A person should not take an eggshell, fill it up, empty it out with an egg first of all, fill it up with oil, and then place it as another reservoir alongside his candle, right? So that the oil should drip and provide more oil as the oil is being consumed by the flame. The reason why we're not going to let you do that is because we're worried that you will partake of some of that oil for your salad or something like that at your table. If you take oil that is designated for a flame, that is the act of kiboy. It's a nisr da'oraisa, so we don't want you to do that. So we say, don't even set up such a lamp to begin with. Even if that lamp is made out of, even if that reservoir that you're making is made out of earthenware, and the oil is a bit more nasty for eating, still we're worried you may take from it. So don't even set up such a lamp to begin with on before Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda matir. Rabbi Yehuda says it's fine. He has no such gezerah. So there's our question. How come Rabbi Yehuda, in this case, makes no gezerah, even though oil is something which all year round I'm partaking of, I'm using? How come he makes no gezerah here?
Yehuda, like the Mishnah we say every Friday night, he doesn't agree with it.
Right. Well, in the Mishnah itself, he says that. Right. Rabbi Yehuda Matir, he says you could set up such a situation. Rabbi Yehuda has no such gezerah. So why not? How come by chametz, because people eat it all year round, they're not used to it being forbidden, we're worried that they're going to take it, don't deal with it, don't search for it anymore. Whereas by this candle on Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda says, set it up, I'm not worried about a person taking oil, which is forbidden all year round also, which is permitted all year round. So we say, Hasam Mishum Chomer de Shabbos Mevadal Bedilei. We answer there by Shabbos, it is super badil. It's some people separate from it. People understand that the laws of Shabbos are so incredibly strict, so important, that even if it's an item which they're used to, they're in that mindset that, of course, it's forbidden. I'll never take from that oil. Rabbi Yehuda therefore says you can set up such a lamp. Not so by Pesach, by Chametz. Okay. Barami the Shabbos HaShabbos. But now I'll ask you.
Shabbos is frequent every week, so you can remember, whereas this is once a year.
I think that might be part of the answer. Shabbos, we kind of have engineered our minds to be in Shabbos mode. And I think that has a lot to do with it. Okay. Barami the Shabbos HaShabbos. But now I'll ask you a question, seemingly contradictory laws from Shabbos itself. We have that Mishnah that we just mentioned about the lamp, and now we have another brisa. The Tanya, I learned that a brisa, Chevel Deli Shenifsak. I have a rope that is attached to a pail. That's what I use to draw water out of a well. If that rope snaps, Lo Yehi Kosher Ela Onvo. You should not tie it together. That would be the Malacha Da'araisa of kosher, of tying. Rather, what you should do is make a slip knot. That's not a malacha. Rabbi Yehuda, however, says, Korek alav punda upaske. Rabbi Yehuda says you should not even do a slip knot. What should you do? You should have the two ends of the rope tied together through through another item, through a belt, or it's another kind of belt. As long as you don't, just don't make a slip knot, whatever you do. Right now, at the moment, the understanding of this brisa is that Rabbi Yehuda does not allow you to make a slip knot because he's concerned that will lead to people making regular knots. So what you have is Rabbi Yehuda, in cases of Shabbos, all of a sudden being makmir, all of a sudden creating dinei derabanan, whereas in the case of the lamp, he was makel, he didn't worry about it. He said, people take Shabbos so seriously, I don't need to make derabanan. So you say, Kashi Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda. It's a stira. And now Kashi derabanan, derabanan. We have a question on the Rabbanan's opinion as well. In the case of the lamp, they were machmir. They said, don't set up such a lamp. In the case of the rope, they said, yeah, do a slip knot. We're not worried about slippery slope, about that turning into people doing da'araisa knots. So we say the Rabbanan lo kasha. There's no contradiction between the rabbis' views. Shemen b'shemen michalef. Because the rabbi's thinking is as follows. Oil with oil a person can mix up. The oil that they usually keep on a dish on their dining room table the rest of the week, they instinctually take from that, and therefore they might instinctually also take from oil in their lamp. So we have to make a gezerah. Aniva b'kashira lo mechalef. But the Rabbanan felt that a regular knot and a slip knot, those are distinct enough that we're not worried that somebody who allows a slip knot will all of a sudden start applying that heter more liberally. So there you do not need to make a gezerah, whereas by oil you do. To Rabbi Yehuda lo kasha, and Rabbi Yehuda will also not have a contradiction. He'll explain as follows: Time of the Rabbi Yehuda la mishum de gezerah de gazer aniva atu kashira. Rabbi Yehuda's rationale is not as we thought, that he forbids a slip knot because that could lead to a regular knot. El mishum de kasav aniva gufa kashirahi. Rabbi Yehuda thinks that a slip knot itself is intrinsically forbidden, and therefore he's not going to allow you to do that at all. It's not about a gezerah whatsoever. In practical halacha, we allow slip knots. Just to point that out.
He thinks it's a permanent knot. The bow is a permanent knot.
He thinks that that's considered a knot that's forbidden. Whether that has a function of timing or not, so that's a separate conversation about the laws of Kshira specifically. And then even the identity of that knot is a problematic kind of knot. Okay. V'rami Rabbanan de Rabbanan. So now, once we're getting into laws of knots and tying, we have another seeming contradiction between the rabbis' opinions. The brisa we just learned, the Rabbanan said you can make a slip knot. We're not worried about that turning into a regular knot. They made no gezerah there. But to Tanan, we learned in another Mishnah, Kirshin Dali Bipaske, that a person should tie his snapped bucket rope together with a belt. Aval lo bechevel. However, do not do so with a rope. Seemingly, the Rabbanan felt that if you allow it for use with a rope, I think Rashi explains this, if you allow use for a rope, somebody ties a non-permanent knot there with such a rope, it would technically be okay. As long as you have in mind that you're going to undo that rope before the end of Shabbos, or within 24 hours, whatever it might be. So you would be allowed to do that, the Rabbanan felt you can't do that, because it may lead to somebody saying, that knot is perfect, I'm going to leave it there. And then it ended up being kashira da'araisa.
This is using a belt between the two.
This is using a regular rope. They allow you to use the belt. They don't allow you to use the rope.
But a belt would be the middle piece of the joining the.
It would be the middle piece joining the two ends of the broken bucket rope.
And
right.
How do they recommend that you tie the belt to those two ends?
I imagine whatever clasps you have.
Just what clasp?
Whatever you're, like our belts. I think you could shut it that way. Okay. What are we up to here? Rabbi Yehuda Mati. Rabbi Yehuda allows this. He allows you even to tie the two ends of the rope together using another rope. So now we explain this brisa a little bit more before we flesh out the question. Chevel demai. What kind of rope are the Rabbanan forbidding and Rabbi Yehuda permitting? Ili mechevel de'alma. If you're talking about a regular standard rope, Rabbi Yehuda mati. Rabbi Yehuda allows that. Kasher shel kal yamahu. That is very possibly going to lead to a lasting knot. Devade asilev tule, and that's certainly going to. This person is going to decide in his mind he's going to leave it. It should be a problem. It should not be something that even Rabbi Yehuda would allow. El b'shita de gardi. Rather, it's simple that we're not dealing with a standard rope. Everybody would agree that that's usher to use, even in a non-permanent fashion. We're talking about a rope of weavers. It's a weaker rope. It's not something that lasts, even if you wanted to leave it there. The Rabbanan made a gezerah de Rabbanan. We're not allowing you to tie your broken bucket rope with even a weaver's rope temporarily, because you may come to do it temporarily with a permanent rope, and that will lead to an Isser D'Oraisa of kosher. Okay, after that's all said and done, we've clarified what this brisa is about. You have the Rabbanan earlier saying you could do a slip knot. They're not worrying what that will devolve into. You have a brisa here where they do make gezeros Rabbanan about tying. They say don't use this weaver's rope because that might lead to using a regular rope. So we say in chevel bechevel michalef. Yeah, it makes sense. Here the rabbis are concerned. People might accidentally confuse one rope with another. If you allow a weaver's rope, you'll allow a regular rope. Aniva b'kshir lo michalfa. But the Rabbanan are fine with you making a slip knot, because the method of tying is not something that people are going to get confused about. If you allow slip knots, they're not worried about that devolving into making a full-fledged knot. Okay. So we've resolved that. Now, a further question on the premise of Rabbi Yehuda. Anytime I'm dealing with an Isser, which people are generally staying away from all year round, that's not something Rabbi Yehuda makes a gezerah against? Vatanya, I learned in a brisa. Bechor she'achaz dam. If I have a bechor, a firstborn animal which has the status of hekdesh, it's dedicated to the Beis HaMikdash from birth. If it has, I'm not allowed to place a mum on such an animal. I'm not allowed to give it a blemish, a wound that it would never recover from, a cut off limb, or anything else that it won't heal. That won't heal. So if I have an animal which is a bechor, it is grabbed by blood. I'm not sure exactly what that is. It's some kind of blood disease that the way you would help it is by bloodletting this animal. So afilu hu meis, even if this animal would die if you did nothing, ein makizin lo dam, you should not do any bloodletting. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda is worried, I'm not even going to let you do a little cut that the animal will heal from, lest you end up doing a wound which will actually lead to a mum, which will invalidate this animal as a korban. So there you see Rabbi Yehuda making a gezerah, even though you're dealing with an isra of hekdesh, which people are generally badil minei. They take that very seriously all year round. They know not to mess with hekdesh. Here, Rabbi Yehuda is making a gezerah, even though earlier, let's say by chadash, we said he has no such gezerah. So there's our question. Let's just finish the brisa though. The chachamim say yakiz, you can do bloodletting, as long as you don't actually place a blemish. You should do a wound, a cut that the animal will heal from. Okay, so there's our question. How do I resolve Rabbi Yehuda? I'm dealing here with an isser which people are badil minei. They are separate from it all year round. They take it seriously. So it seems, based on the rules we discussed earlier, Rabbi Yehuda should not have any need for a gezerah here. Everybody takes it seriously anyways. So why is he doing it here? So we say Hasam Mitosha Adam Bahul al Mamono. It's different here because an individual is very concerned about his money. You're dealing with a Kohen who owns this bechor. It'll eventually be brought as a carbon. It'll be a barbecue for him, or parts of it, at some point, if he provided that he saves this animal. If not, he loses out on a good steak. So since he's all concerned about it, Aminan Ishar Yisli b'makom she'inosin bomum. Rabbi Yehuda says if I allow him to make cuts in a way that it doesn't create a mum, he's so absorbed in his financial loss, he's going to end up doing things which will also result in a mum being created as well, a blemish being done as well. He's going to go overboard in the heter given to him, so I can't let him do anything.
That's counterintuitive.
So you hold like the Rabbanan. For Rabbanan, kol shekain de ilo sharius like klal asi l'mi'aved. The Rabbanan say the opposite logic, exactly what you're saying. That if you don't allow him to do this at all, he's going to end up doing everything. Right? If we don't give him an option, which is mutter, of giving the animal a cut that the animal will heal from, then the guy's going to say, the guy cares about his money so much, he'll violate all Isurim, and they'll say, once I'm violating Isur the Rabbanan, it's all fine, and he'll end up creating a mum. So the Rabbanan say you have to give him an option. But in any event, we see Rabbi Yehuda's perspective, is that if a person, even though I'm dealing with an Isur which people are badilminei, they take it seriously all year round, since this is an Isur which involves the potential for financial loss, Rabbi Yehuda here says that you do need a gezerah. In other words, it's another exception. Okay. Question. And now let's question that premise. Is Rabbi Yehuda really make gezerahs when a person is concerned about his money? Batanan, I learned in a Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, "In mekadon habehima b'yom tov mepnei shu oseh chabura." A person should not comb his animal on Yom Tov with a certain kind of comb, which we'll define shortly, a kidor, a metal kind of comb, because it creates a wound in the animal on Yom Tov. If an animal has like caked up dirt on its hair, that could be very painful for it. So animal owners, they would to relieve their animals of pain, they would comb it off. You shouldn't use this. You shouldn't do this act of mekadron on Yom Tov because it will result in causing the animal to bleed. That would be an isser of shchita on Shabbat on Yom Tov. Aval mekartzevin. However, what you could do, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you can do this act of kirtzuf, of combing with a wooden comb. We'll see why that's different. I mean, basically, it's because it doesn't create a wound. There's less of a chance of cuts being made. The Chachamim say, "In mekadon af, in mekartzefin." The Chachamim say you can't do any of this. You can't do any kind of combing whatsoever on Yom Tov. Betanya, and we learned in a brisa, "Ezu kidor ve'ezu kirtzef." What's the difference between kidor, which Rabbi Yehuda forbids, and kirtzef, which Rabbi Yehuda allows? Kidor katnis va'osin chabura. The metal comb has a very fine teeth. They're also made out of metal. It's going to create wounds. Kirtzuf gedolim me'inosin chabura. By kirtzuf, the teeth of the comb are larger, they're coarser, and they're not going to create a wound. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda thinks that that's permitted. Okay, but at the end, when everything is all said and done, our question is: here you have an isser in which somebody is supposedly bal al mamono. He's worried about his financial loss. His animal is in pain, his property. And Rabbi Yehuda does not make a gezerah here. Whereas earlier by the Bechor, Rabbi Yehuda did make a gezerah. He was machmir. So what gives? So they say, Hassan the ishavikle mayis amrinon adam bal amamono. We said there's no contradiction. Over there by the Bechor, if you have the owner leave the animal with this blood illness, whatever it was, the animal is going to die. So Rabbi Yehuda says people take that much more seriously. We have to make a gezerah that doesn't allow them to do anything because they're going to violate Isurim. Hacha, but here in this case of combing this animal, ishavikle tar ba'almahu. If I leave the cake dirt on this animal, it's just going to be in pain. There's no risk of it dying. So there we have no people are not as crazed about their property at that point in time. So Rabbi Yehuda says no need for a gezerah derabanan. No need to say that you can't use the metal comb. No need to say that you can't use the wooden comb either. Rabbi Yehuda, ma'ishna gabe chametz the gazo, ma'ishna gabe kirsuf the lo gazar. Everything comes full circle now. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda, how come you're making a gezerah, no searching for chametz after chatzos hayom? You may come to eat it. Whereas by the combing of the animal, you make no gezerah. You say use the wooden comb without a problem. So say lechem belechem michalef. Rabbi Yehuda says bread and bread people will come to mix up. Again, that's another way of saying bread is something I eat all year long. I may come to eat this instinctually. Kidur bekirtzaf lo michalef. However, using a wooden comb, Rabbi Yehuda felt is distinct enough from using the metal comb. We're not worried about a slippery slope. Rabbi Yehuda says that there's no gezerah needed. Again, the Rabbanan think a gezerah is needed, and they would disagree with him. Okay. Next Mishnah. Rabbi Meir says, Ochlim kol chamesh v'sorfim b'tchila sheish. Actually, just to make sure we're all talking on the same wavelength here for this Mishnah. So this talks about what is the process, what's the schedule on Erev Pesach, when do I burn, when am I not allowed to eat, when am I only allowed to benefit. So when we say 6th hour, we mean the hour before Chatzos. After Chatzos, that's when the Isser Da'araisa of Chametz kicks in. You would have to burn for sure at that point in time. The Rabbanan scaled everything back. They said there are points in time where you're forbidden to eat, there's a point in time where you're forbidden to benefit, and there's a point in time where you should be burning already, even though from the Torah's perspective you don't need to burn yet. So, what is the structure of that? Rabbi Meir says, Ochlim kol chamesh, a person can eat the entirety of the 5th hour, meaning the second to last hour before Chatzos. V'sorfin b'tchila sheish, the hour before Chatzos, that 6th hour, you should be burning your chametz. That's a din derabanan. Rabbi Yehuda says, and this is how we paskin, Ochlin kol arba, the 3rd to last hour, the 4th hour of the day, you can eat chametz. V'tolin bo chamesh, on the 5th hour, second to last hour before Chatzos, the chametz hangs, meaning you don't eat it, but it is permitted for benefit. You could give it to your animals, you could sell it still at that point. V'sorfin b'tchila sheish, and it should be burned at the beginning of the 6th hour, the hour right before Chatzos. That is how we paskin. Okay, but Rabbi Yehuda said furthermore, Shtei chalos shel toda psulos munachos al gav ha'itz. In the times of the Mikdash, they actually had a system by which they demonstrated these rules to the public. You had 2 loaves from a korban toda that were invalidated. We'll see why that happened tomorrow. They're resting on a bench that's in full public view. Kol zman shemunachos kol ha'am ochlin. The entire time that both of those loaves are on this bench, the entire nation knows it's still mutter to eat chametz at this point. Nitla achas, once one of them was removed, tolan, everybody knew that they were in that hanging state where chametz should not be eaten, but it can be benefited from, can be sold. Lo ochlin v'lo sorfin, they didn't eat it, but they didn't have to burn it yet either. Nitlu shteyan, once the second loaf was also taken, there's nothing left there. Hischilu kol ha'am sorfin, the entire nation knew that was the time to start burning up chametz. Okay, so he had a demonstration of Rabbi Yehuda's principles back in the times of the Mikdash. Rabbi Gamliel said, Chulin ne'echolin kol arba. He gives a little bit of a twist to Rabbi Yehuda's rules. He says, you're allowed to eat the entire 4th hour. That applies to chulin, to non-truma chametz products. Utruma kol chamesh. Even though other chametz I can't eat anymore in the 5th hour, truma you can. Because the burning of truma that is totally tahar, we take much more seriously. We generally don't allow you to do that. Here, for obviously to get ready for Pesach, to burn chametz, it would be allowed, but applying dinei derabanan is more complicated. When I'm dealing with truma, which should not be burned ideally, it should be eaten. So we have an additional allowance that 5th hour truma can be eaten. V'sorfim b'tchila sheish. But again, everybody agrees that everything is burned, even truma, in the 6th hour. Okay. So now we have a Mishnah that we're going to quote, and for the rest of this Amud and for most of the next Amud also, it's not so you won't see how this connects until tomorrow. But we're going to talk about a Mishnah in Sanhedrin about the laws of testimony in criminal cases. If I have Eidim that come and they testify that Ploni ate chazer, he ate treif, he should get malchus, etc. So we do drisha v'chakira, we do cross-examination of the witnesses, we take them into separate rooms. We question them, make sure that their story pans out on all the details, that they're saying the same thing, that they're not conspiring against the guy. So our Mishnah that we're about to read deals with how close do they have to be in the facts that they state. If they're a little off from each other, does that invalidate testimony or does it not? So it depends on how off they are. So Tanan Hassam, we learned there in Masechah Sanhedrin, you could basically see how this is going to connect. We're going to talk about how much people err in hours, and therefore how much there's a need to make dinei derabanan for Hilchos Chametz on Pesach.
What brings such an individual to the beis din? I mean,
the Edom come, if they see somebody violate an Isser, and they gave him a warning properly, so then they go to the beis din, we saw so-and-so do this act.
Obligation to it.
Yes, they have an obligation to. Okay, so we learned on a Mishnah there. Echad omer b'shnayim b'chodesh, v'echad omer b'shlosha. Let's say one witness says it happened on the second day of the month that I saw, let's say, Ploni murder somebody. And the other guy says it was on the third of the month that I saw it. Edusan kayemis. That testimony is fit. That's not invalidated. They're not far off enough from each other. We view it as if they're giving the same story. Shezeh yodea b'ibiro shel chodesh, v'zeh enu yodea b'ibiro shel chodesh. One guy happens to know about the intercalation of the month. He knows the proper date based on Rosh Chodesh. The other guy wasn't paying so much attention, so he's off by a day. But it's understandable. They were looking at the same story. But if one says that it happened on the third of the month, the other says it happened on the fifth of the month, then their edus is in fact too far off from each other. We know something's up here. We get rid of their testimony. It's invalidated. If one says it happened in the second hour of the day, the other says it happened in the third hour of the day. They didn't have watches back then. They're working off what they see as the positioning of the sun. Keep that in mind. So Edusan Kayemis, their testimony is valid and it's close enough to each other. Echad Omer b'shalosh ve'echad Omer b'chamesh. If one says it happened in the third hour, the other says it happened in the fifth hour, they're off by two. So Edusan Batela. Then their testimony is rejected. It's viewed as too far off. Their stories are, it's a conspiracy of some sort. Rabbi Meir. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda, however, says Edusan Kayemis. 2 hours off is still close enough. 3 and 5 is fine. Their testimony is upheld. But if one says 5 and the other says 7, again, it's only off by 2. But now we're dealing with 2 different times that are on the other side, on opposite sides of Chatzos, of midday. You can much more easily tell what time of day it is based on the entire direction of where your shadows are, etc. So then, Edusim Betela. Even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that that testimony should be rejected. People can't be that far off if I'm dealing with opposite sides of Chatzos. Because in the 5th hour of the day the sun is in the east, and the 7th hour of the day the sun is in the west, people should not be able to make such mistakes. Amar Rabbi, end quote of the Mishnah. Okay. Amar Rabbi says, "Kishatim salomar l'divrei Rabbi Meir ein adam tova v'lo klum." If you analyze this Mishnah in Sanhedrin, essentially what you have is that according to Rabbi Meir, people don't make mistakes in terms of the time of the day at all, or at least nothing besides very little. The Devi Rabbi Yehuda unto a chatzi shah. According to Rabbi Yehuda, people can make a mistake of up to a half hour. Let's explain that. The Divrei Rabbi Meir in on Torah v'lo klum. According to Rabbi Meir, people don't make mistakes at all in terms of the timing, because ma'aseh ki hava b'meipak tartiu me'ayal plus. The incident we mentioned in our Mishnah, where one guy said hour 2, the other guy said hour 3, we'll say that what happened, this incident took place as the second hour was ending and the third hour was beginning. It was at that border there. The one that said it happened in the second hour, what he meant was what he thought it was the end of the second. And the one that said 3, he meant the beginning of the third, but you see that they don't have to actually be so far off to be able to make these seemingly contradicting statements. So it's really, people are erring only in a very slight amount. According to Rabbi Yehuda, an hour can be made of up to a half hour. We'll say that in his instance, what Rabbi Yehuda allowed a case where one guy says hour 3, the other guy says hour 5. We'll say what happened? Halfway through the 4th hour is where the incident took place. The one that said 3 meant at the end of the 3rd hour, only a half hour off from 3 1/4. Through 3 1/2, sorry. The Katai Palga the Shaita Lakame. And he made a mistake with regards to being in a half hour too early. The guy that said hour 5, he meant the beginning of hour 5. The Katai Palga the Shaita Lachore. He was late by a half hour. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, the mistake can only be made of a half hour. That's going to be relevant. So we're going to come to tomorrow a discussion about how much are we worried about people making mistakes in terms of timing. That'll be relevant to regards to how many how distant the dinei derabanan need to be about hilchos chametz. How much can people err and think, oh, I'm allowed to eat chametz now when they would be incorrect. Okay. Just point out another perspective on this Mishnah in Sanhedrin. Others say Abaye's statement a little bit differently. According to Rabbi Meir's take on this Mishnah, in this Mishnah, a person can make a mistake of just a slight amount. According to Rabbi Yehuda, people make a mistake of an hour and a little bit. According to Rabbi Meir, you make a mistake of just a little bit, because like we said earlier, the incident happened either at the beginning of the third hour or at the end of the second. One of them made a mistake about a slight amount. He either estimated a little bit too early, a little bit too late. According to Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, he allows testimony where one guy says 3, one guy says 5. Adam toam shao mashu. I'll say that a person can make an error of an entire hour and a little bit. Masaki hava obasav shalosh ubetchilas chamesh. We'll say that the incident actually took place either at the end of the third hour or at the beginning of the fifth. One of them made a mistake and made a mistake of an hour and a little bit. Let's say it happened at the beginning of the fifth. So the guy that says hour 3, he meant the end of the third hour. And he made that mistake just a little bit to get to 4, and then the entirety of the fourth hour, and that leaves you with where the incident actually took place. Okay, we'll end here. Tomorrow.